even though I wasn't selling stuff, I had sold some stuff, and I did start to think to myself, you know what, I'm pretty good at this. Like I don't suck. Let's put it that way. And and I was like, and maybe because listen, you know, I'd had multiple careers at this point. You know what I'm saying? This was like this is my last career, but I'd had multiple careers before this, you know? And I was like, okay, I'm pretty good at this. You do have to have this like almost irrational belief in yourself because you get so many no's. It's a business of no. And so and I'm sure it's the same way for your wife, right? Like when you're an actress, it's very similar. Yeah. And what you have to be able to do is not take it personally and not like, and again, this is all about this is about the work testing you. Right. It's like, how many no's can you take before you throw up your hands, right? Right. How many can you fucking take? Right. And in this business, you have to be able to take them
infinite. Yeah, absolutely. Exactly.
Absolutely.
Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon is a podcast on directing for anybody that's, quite simply, ever watched anything. Visit PeteChatmon.com to get your official podcast merch. Hoodies, hats, jackets, mugs, and other swag. And learn more about your host.
Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon is sponsored by the good folks at Scriptation. Scriptation is the Emmy Award-winning app for production that allows you to mark up scripts, transfer notes, generate breakdowns, and so much more. No matter where you fall on the call sheet, Scriptation makes it easy to go paperless, collaborate with your crew, and save hours of time. Go to scriptation.com/Pete to learn more and receive a special offer exclusive to Let's Shoot listeners. Now, on to the show. All right, welcome to episode 77 of Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon. Today's guest is screenwriter and showrunner Sascha Penn. Sascha is prolific, working across both television and film. I feel like I can't go a week without seeing my man's name in the trades for a new project being sold, or developed, or shooting, or in this week's case, premiering. That's right. Sascha is the creator, showrunner, and executive producer of Starz' Power Book 3, Raising Kanan, entering its 4th season when it premieres this Friday, March 7th. We recorded this interview shortly after I wrapped a season 5 episode of the show a few months back, and it's a great conversation I hope you'll enjoy. Now, catch up. I've got 3 quick updates. I'm wrapping up posts on my Grosse Pointe Garden Society episode, working with editor Todd Gerlinger, whom I also had the pleasure of working with on Reasonable Doubt on a couple episodes. It's all going smoothly, and I'm excited to pass my cut on to the producers when my 4 days of editing are up. I'm also finalizing the cast list for my heist feature, and we're going to start going out to talent in the coming weeks. I'm super excited to see how that shapes up, and then, of course, to get to that good old find the money stage. I imagine once some of these items solidify, we'll be able to make an official announcement of who we're working with, and I'll stop speaking so cryptically about this project. Now, the third update was last week's special announcement. We're doing our first live podcast event for Let's Shoot on March 19th in Los Angeles at the Dynasty Typewriter. We'll be having a special screening of episode 306 of Yellow Jackets, directed by yours truly, followed by a talkback with creators and showrunners of Showtime's Yellow Jackets, Ashley Lyle and Bart Nickerson, as well as producing director Jeff Bird and cast members Warren Cole and Courtney Eaton. Tickets are $15, and all proceeds will go to the Altadena Community Preservation Fund. Stay tuned for more details on our social channels at Pete Chatmon and at Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon. And I hope you'll join us live and bring your questions and good energy to this first live event. Now, episode 77 of Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon with screenwriter and showrunner Sascha Penn.
Roll sound. Speed.
The interview. Take 1.
All right, man. Welcoming Sascha Penn to the podcast. look, my first question, man, I feel like every other week I see you have a new script being sold in development. Let me get a script, man. What's going on?
Listen, that would be the dream right there. That would be the dream. I know you're busy. I know you got scripts of your own. So listen, who are you telling?
Man. Nah, it's dope. I love being in Video Village and seeing an update, and I'm sitting right next to this motherfucker. Like, oh, congratulations. So how, my records show from our wonderful producer Jada that you got your start in business school, but before we kind of get to that, and then the transition into writing and directing and producing and all of that, like, where'd you grow up, man? And what was your first kind of introduction to storytelling?
Well, I grew up in Boston, kind of all over. Parents were divorced, so I was sort of between them. I went to a Jewish day school in Newton, Massachusetts. I went to high school, public high school, where my mom lived. Sort of a western suburb of Boston. And then I went to college at University of Rochester. But to go back to your sort of original question, my parents were both immigrants. And so I'm the first generation of my family to be born here. And popular culture for them, I think, was the real sort of like touchstone as to what it meant to be American, right?
Right.
So movies were a huge, huge part of my childhood. Huge part, and my parents used to take me to see everything, and back then, there were a lot of like revival houses around the country when it came to, so we'd see, old Alfred Hitchcock movies, like, we'd see, my dad was like real into like classic 3D movies. So we'd see like House of Wax with Vincent Price, but, so we just saw like everything. And, I'm of an age, by the way, where movies were just like, it was like the golden era of filmmaking, right? So it's like all the Star Wars movies, all the, Raiders of the Lost Ark, is when Spielberg was like, really doing his thing, and movies were real events,
Right.
And also like any kid, listen, I grew up in a divorced home, so it was a lot of TV. I watched every episode of Streets of San Francisco. I watched every episode of Good Times and Welcome Back, Kotter. And, so,
right.
So, I mean, I'm of that generation, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think in terms of filmed entertainment, that was a huge part of my childhood and of my life. I also, at a certain point, became a pretty big reader. And I always say to people who are trying to break into this, whether it's writers or directors, like, reading is such a critical piece, and specifically sort of reading fiction is such a critical piece, I believe, of what we do, right? Because what it does is it trains your brain to take words and make images out of them, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's so important. And I think one of the challenges when I meet a lot of writers, across the board, whether I'm trying to hire someone or whatever, you can always sort of tell the people who have only really read scripts as opposed to the people who actually have read, because, there's just, they sort of lack a little bit of how should I even put it? Like, their brains have not been quite wired in the way of turning, they're real trained in how to write a script, but they're not necessarily trained in how to tell a story. Right. And isn't that a thing too? That's you make a good point, because there are scripts that I've read, and like after 100, if it's a feature, 107 to 140 pages, I'm like, man, that was well written. It wasn't good. It wasn't good. It was well written, and it kind of masked some of the narrative, kind of shortcomings, and that's, those people probably have great careers. Yeah. Someone once told me early on in my career, this is when I was really doing features, write a movie, don't write a script, write. And it's true. Like, and look, we've worked together, and so you've seen the scripts that I write. I try to write them in a literary way. I try to write them in a way where it's like, oh, this is a fun read. Do you know what I mean? Because I think, I think that's really important. And it's not just important for the director, it's important for me. Like, if it isn't written that way, it's hard for me to even track it.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think, and again, like, as the listeners or viewers, whatever, I mean, I know, like, we were just on set together recently, right?
Right.
And so I think one of the conversations that you and I had on set was like, one of my things is like, I always want to make sure that we're always starting from story, whether it's about the blocking or the shot or whatever. Like that's where we're starting from. And then everything what we're doing is we're just trying to amplify that story as opposed to, one of the challenges that I always face when working with a director that I don't know is like, well, are they just trying to get a good shot? Or are they trying to get the best story?
Right.
And that's, look, I'll give you a ton of credit, man. You're one of the best at that. You know what I mean?
Oh man. Thank you, brother.
Oh, dude, come on. And so I think, the conversations that we had on set, like for me, were like super affirming, and like we were both coming from this place of like, we're trying to tell this story. How best do we do that?
Right.
And that's, I think that's the difference, frankly, between, great writers and good writers, because what you said earlier is so true. And I have the exact same experience, Pete, which is like, you'll read a script and you're like, oh shit, this is really well written.
Right.
And then by the end of it, just like you said, you're kind of like, but what did it all add up to? Like, it was like a pleasant experience reading it, but there wasn't it didn't add up to shit.
It's like whatever's the next great, I guess, like fast casual, right? There's like fast food, then there's like fast casual, and then there's like fancy fare dining, and then there's fucking Michelin. Like there's a lot of fast casual scripts.
There is.
And more power to them, I guess. I don't know. Yeah. But for people out there, you really got to make sure there's something underneath the presentation, because you can get fooled by it, especially in a world where you're reading a lot and you just want to fucking have the pages turn sometimes. Yep. And then you forget that there's nothing underneath. What do you, man, I have two questions. I'll throw them at you in a row so I don't forget. One is going back, which is as someone who was also raised by TV, like, what was the first thing you saw, if you remember, where you're like, I shouldn't have seen that? Like for me, it was Nightmare on Elm Street at like 5. And it fucked me up for like 12 years running upstairs from the basement. And then do you subscribe to that like first 30, last 10 rule when reading a feature?
I actually don't even know what that rule is, to be honest with you.
Some people will they'll read the first 30 pages and then hop to the last 10 to see if it's to get some sense of whether they should read the whole thing. Yeah.
I didn't know that rule, so I've never subscribed to it. Look, for me, if in the first 15, 20 pages, I'm not engaged, I'm not going to finish the script, right? Like it's just, I mean, life is too short. And it's just, it's just like you, I read so many scripts, and one of the things that's so crazy, and I want to circle back to your other question too, but one of the things that's so crazy about what you do and I do is like, so many people will come up to us and say, hey, can you just read my script and tell me what you think? And, there's a presumptuousness to that as I've gotten older and wiser, I've actually started to take offense to, which is like, well, it's like when you're having a problem with your car, do you drive it into the garage and say to the mechanic, hey, can you just look at my car for a few hours and tell me what's wrong with it?
Right.
I mean, this is what we do for a living.
I got 4 indictments. You mind taking a look at this? Look at my case real quick.
It's like, this is what we do for a living, and not to be a dick, but it's like, you're asking me to, I'm a professional, like, and just because all it seems like to you is reading, like, no, man, like if I'm going to read something, like I'm really going to invest myself in it. And that's a ton to ask, especially like we all have a limited time again on planet Earth. Like, me setting aside an hour and a half to read your script means an hour and a half I'm not spending with my kids. An hour and a half I'm not spending with myself. And it's just so weird when people are, they'll sort of get bent out of shape. You're like, you know what, man, I'm just not really doing that anymore. And they're like, wow, Well, I mean, look,
you read an hour and a half, you spend, because you're thoughtful.
Yes.
You spend 45 minutes on like a really accurate assessment, but also like, I gotta like encourage.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, and have something that you can think about that's read between the lines a little bit. And then it's like, you send that off and they're like, oh yeah. I got a new draft anyway. Thanks.
100%.
And you're like, cool. Cool.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. So I'm trying to think the first thing I shouldn't have watched that sort of scared the shit out of me. I mean, look, we also, we sort of grew up, I think, in a similar era. So some of those horror movies, like, I think I think the first Halloween, I remember seeing that and being like, yo, this is really fucking scary. Also, the first Friday the 13th, really, and of course back then it was like, people had VCRs, right? And so you were like, and then when someone would get one of those tapes, he'd be like, oh shit, and be like, I think there are two other things that I do remember just being like, yo, not that I wish I hadn't seen it, but there was also this whole thing, and this was not a feature film, but do you remember this whole period where there was like this thing called Faces of Death?
I knew you were going to say that. Yeah. Horrible. And they had like 9 volumes of that.
And that shit went around like it was fucking crack rock. It was unbelievable. It's like yo, so-and-so's got Faces of Death. And then you like, oh my God. That was
people getting hit by trains and
my God.
Wild.
Oh God, I wish I'd never watched that. No. One movie that, not that I wish I hadn't seen, but that definitely sort of like blew me away was Scarface. When I first saw Scarface, I do remember being like, oh shit. Yeah. That movie really sort of changed the game a little bit for me, I think. And in terms of
what about it, you think?
I just thought it was so it just was such an immersive experience, I guess. It had this really epic quality to it, right?
Yeah.
And it just, it was sort of, I guess, and I'm only saying this now, I didn't think of it at the time, but there was also this sort of immigrant experience that was sort of interesting, right? And just the sheer violence of it was like kind of unlike anything I'd really seen.
For sure.
So that was really sort of crazy.
Yeah, because that's 83, if I'm not mistaken. And like that, they weren't doing the chainsaw really like that. And all that final shootout at the house, like that was brand new real estate.
Absolutely. And then, Tony's sister running up on him in that final scene after he killed, there was just so much shit going on in that movie that really sort of changed the way I saw the game. And then TV wise, I will say, I remember watching the pilot of Miami Vice with my dad and just being like, whoa.
Yeah, it was dope.
You can do that on TV, and there were a few shows. I mean, I was a huge growing up Hill Street Blues guy. Like I thought that show was so, it was so groundbreaking at the time, so there was just a lot of, and it's funny, if you watch the pilot of Miami Vice now, it doesn't quite hold up the way it did at the time.
Right.
But still, it just was so, it was Michael Mann just doing Michael Mann shit. And that was just so different than anything we'd ever seen before on TV.
Kind of a bit of a foreshadowing of this kind of peak TV filmmakers making, something with a little more style and thought and depth to it. 30 years too early.
Yeah. What shows do you remember as a kid that you really sort of
I know they probably thought I was a weirdo. I used to watch the Gary Shandling show. I love that.
Well, come on.
I'm like, no one I knew watched it. I loved it.
Yeah.
Then there was, it was Cosby, Different World.
Of course.
Obviously, I took great pleasure working with Tony Danza because Who's the Boss was, was the jam. And there were just shows like, it was unique because back then you I don't remember really being network, like paying, like bowing down to a particular network. I loved Murphy Brown.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I would hop to the NBC. ABC at that time, I don't think really had things that I was watching that I recall. And NBC kind of had it on lock.
Yeah, man.
No, I just was,
I was
most of the time seeing black folks was what did it for me.
Yeah. I was also, I'm probably a little bit older than you. So also like on Friday nights before my parents split up, I remember my dad, every Friday night, he would grab our old black and white radio TV from upstairs, it was in their bedroom, and he'd walk it down to our little kitchen, and we'd eat dinner and we'd watch the Rockford Files, right?
Word.
So that was also like a big, I will say like, shit, I watched a lot of fucking TV, man. Like I think about it now and it's like, I watched a tremendous amount of TV. And it's funny because I have kids who are older than your daughter, in fact, both of them are in college, and they don't really watch TV. Not like we did. In fact, not really at all. The only thing they really watch on TV at this point is sports, right? They only watch the NBA or maybe football or something. But yeah, so it's weird because, when we were growing up, there was like a conversation we would all have, like after the Cosby Show or whatever.
Right.
And I don't know that conversation. I mean, look, the conversation still exists, but it's mostly about like, some influencers doing some shit or fucking Jake Paul or like, I feel like these kids are missing out a little bit on that shit. Although, look, when we were growing up, people were saying the same things about TV that they said about the internet now, right? Which is it's going to destroy the sense of community that people have. Because, it used to be before the really advent of TV, people would go out to like spend time with other people, right?
Right.
They'd go to the fucking VFW or they'd go bowling or they'd do whatever. And TV really changed that and actually probably had a somewhat fucked up impact on American society, some of which I think we're probably still seeing play out right now. But it is interesting how the advent of screens, whether it's TV or your phone or whatever, in an interesting way sort of pushes us apart or keeps us separate from each other. Although again, I feel like with TV, especially, when I was much younger, there were only 3 fucking networks or whatever it was.
Right.
It did feel like there was a national conversation that was being had on some level, not entirely, but on some level that doesn't really exist.
No, you're right. I mean, I think also too, like a few things, like I remember Obama said that basically streaming was kind of like the new novel. You know what I mean? Like people don't read anymore, but there's all these books and all these episodes, and they're kind of like, getting into more specific journeys and characters in peak TV that we wouldn't have really had access to in that way. And it seems like after the peak, we're getting back to the reality of like people don't want to read. They don't want to read. They don't want to read, and so it's all kind of shifting. And I was gonna ask, so going from all of this tremendous consumption of TV, how did you end up you went to Columbia Business School, right?
Yeah, so I went to University of Rochester, where I double majored in English and African American studies. Then I moved back to Boston. I worked at WGBH TV, which is sort of the flagship PBS station in the country. I worked at a series called The American Experience, but they were doing a sort of documentary series called Africans in America that I worked on. It was directed by and produced by a guy named Orlando Bagwell, who had worked on like Eyes on the Prize and a number of like really well thought of documentaries. And then I went and I moved to New York with my girlfriend at the time, and I worked at Harlem Hospital for about 5-6 years. I helped to run this community-based health organization in Harlem that was designed to sort of reduce morbidity and mortality due to heart disease, and which was kind of a cool job at the time. I was not for profit, and at a certain point, though, it sort of became clear to me there was a little bit of a dead end for me in terms of the not-for-profit world. And I lived on 101st Street, and I used to cut through Columbia because my office was 127th and Lenox, and I lived on 101st, and so I would cut through Columbia, and I was like 101st and West End Avenue, and I would cut through Columbia every day when I walked to and from work, because I would walk to and from work. And I bumped into someone I knew. I was cutting through Columbia, and I was like, "Oh, what do you got? What are you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I go to Columbia Business School." I'm like, "Really?" It hadn't even occurred to me. He's like, "Oh yeah." Like, it's the best. It's, and it was like a Thursday night, and they were having like some sort of like, fucking social event or some shit. So I stepped inside for a couple minutes, and then I was like, I gotta go. But in that moment, I was sort of like, maybe this is a way to sort of do a reset a little bit, So I applied to Columbia, NYU, a couple other spots. It's funny, I didn't get in the first time around. And then when I applied again next year, I got into all of them because I applied really late the first time. And while I was there, I met 2 guys someone who remains my friend today, a guy named Erwin Prasad. And he he and his brother had a marketing firm at the time called Prasad Brothers. They were sort of well known around New York because they would throw these parties.
Is it Persaud?
Correct.
I remember like seeing those flyers, and I feel like a homie of mine, AJ Calloway, who I grew up with. I feel like did he throw parties with them too?
He would be at the parties. I don't know if AJ was like throwing them. I mean, he might have thrown a couple, because the whole thing with their parties is they get them sponsored by like Tanqueray or some fucking mobile. It was that was part of the whole thing. So Erwin and I did this independent study project, with these producers from LA, Bob Title and George Tillman. George Tillman's the director, actually.
Yeah.
And they were trying to start. Yeah, exactly. State Street. They were trying to start their own independent sort of studio in a way. And they were like, do the business plan. It was kind of, but anyway, that was sort of my introduction to, like working in the entertainment industry. Up till that point, I'm going to be completely honest with you, it always felt like an abstraction to me. Like, my dad was a psychiatrist. My mom was a piano teacher. Right. It's not like I ever really thought that this was like a tangible profession for me.
Right.
But I started working with these guys, and they were like, "Oh, you should move to LA." I mean, that thing kind of went nowhere. You should move to LA. We should move to LA. So I was like, "Fuck it." You know what? I'm going to move to LA, because most of the people I was going to business school with, they were going into consulting and investment banking, and that just wasn't really me. I just didn't feel like that was something I wanted to do. So I moved to LA, and look, when you talk about it makes it sound so easy, but as you know, it's not.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if you've talked about your story on this show, but it's like it takes you 3 minutes to describe what took fucking 10 years.
Right. Exactly.
So with that caveat, I sort of bounced around a little bit, then finally started working in music videos and commercials. And that sort of led to me starting to read scripts. Mm-hmm. And I met an agent who remains my agent to this very day, Andrew Miller at CAA. And I had said to him, and I was reading these scripts, and I was like, wow, like, interesting. I somehow thought it was going to be harder, Right.
Wait, how did you meet him?
So after I worked in music video commercials, I started an independent production company with a friend. And we did a lot of sort of promo work and stuff like that. It was actually, we worked consistently, did a lot of Disney Channel shit. It was all through him. Right. He had a ton of connects.
Right.
And one of the things we did was this thing called Minute Movies for NBC. This was like right at the beginning of the DVR thing. It was TiVo.
Right.
They were terrified that people were going to just blast through commercials. Yeah. So NBC did this thing where they did what they called minute movies, where they were like these minute long films that were like cliffhangers, and they would do their commercial breaks. Mm-hmm. And they would do like a 30-second thing, then another, and then the next commercial break, there'd be another 30-second thing so it was like these short films. And they got some real big filmmakers to do them, like Philip Atwell and I forget who else, but there were, and we produced these. Again, it was all through my business partner, a guy named Scott Bright. He's pretty prolific. One of the ones we did was with a guy named Will Wright, who created The Sims. And he said to us, listen, I have an overall at Fox. He also created Sim City. And he was like, if you ever have an idea for a show, let me know. So I came up with what I thought was a pretty cool idea for the show. Sort of pitched it to him via email. And then he was like, you should come up to Berkeley and we can talk about it. So we drove up to Berkeley and we met with him. He's like, I'm in. So he was repped at CAA.
Yeah. Were you, I hate to keep interrupting, but like, were you like, man, I've done so many things in my career. Like, this ain't shit. I'm just go pitch it, talk to him about it. Or were you like, oh, this might be the moment that things go in a different direction? Like, how are you entering that?
I felt like it might be the moment. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
It felt like, cause it's like, and this, it's like getting into CAA felt like on some level getting the keys to the kingdom a little bit. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, and that's just how it felt back then. I don't know what it feels like now. I really don't. But it's just like, it felt like, oh, wow. Like all of a sudden I got some shit to talk about. I got something going on,
Right.
So he's like, look, I'm repped at CAA. Let's go meet with them. And look, he was a real big deal there. So when we walked in, it was that agent shit where it was like 5 agents. And one of them was this guy, Andrew Miller, who had just started as an agent. I think he'd come over from UTA. He was real young. And he and I we vibed. But what happened with that project, and this is the long-winded, I said, oh, it's a 3-minute story. Of course, it ends up taking fucking 20 minutes. But basically what happened was CA's like, well, because in my mind, I was like, well, shit, I could write this. And CA's like, nah, dude, that's not fucking happening. Like, you've never written anything. Okay. So they brought in a writer who was a pretty big writer for them and was like, he's going to write it. Okay, cool. So, and this is kind of a crazy story. We go to pitch the show at Fox, right to Gail Berman, right? Because this dude will write. He's a big dog. And they're like, okay. Now, I knew nothing about the business then, right? Nothing. What I didn't know is that shit was bought before we ever walked in the door, right?
Right.
No idea. But it was, because they have an overall with him. Of course, they're going to say, yes, they're already paying this guy, right?
Right.
I didn't know that. But we walk in, and it's like 5 agents deep. It's me. It's my business partner. It's Will. And it's also this writer. So he starts to pitch it. And I had helped him with the pitch. This writer does. And by the way, real established writer, also happens to be a great guy. In the middle of the pitch, he's drinking a Coke and I see his hand shaking. And I'm like, oh, fuck. And in the middle of the pitch, he says, I can't continue. I'm too nervous. And I'm like, what? And again, you have to understand, Pete, like I thought, like I was like, oh, wow, we're about to. So I jumped in and I just finished the pitch.
Wow.
And at the end of it, Gilbert was like, yeah, we're in. And I was like, oh, shit. Like, look at me. I just sold that. I will say that, like, Andrew Miller, again, he came over, he's like, yo, man, you really saved that shit. And I was like, oh, wow, I guess I saved it. So then we get our deals, right? And this writer is getting like, I think it was like $350 to write it. And I got $10,000 for the idea. And I'm like, I am on the wrong end of this fucking deal.
Right.
So, he starts to write the script, and this crazy thing happens where I'll call him up and he'll have sent me pages, and I'll pitch him a line of dialogue and he'll put it right into the script. I'm like, what the fuck? I was like, either this guy isn't that great or this is easier than I think it is.
Right.
So I'll call up this agent and I say, listen, send me like the 50 best scripts you read in the last 5 years, TV scripts. And he's like, no problem. So he sends me all these scripts and, I read them, and I will tell you that, like, and by the way, they were all shows that were like on the air or had been on the air. 40 of them, I was like, wow, these are fucking trash. That's how much of a fucking idiot I was. These are trash. 5 of them, I was like, I think I could write this right now.
Right.
And then there were 5 that I was like, wow, these are really, really good. It may take me a minute to get there, but I think I could. And one script that really stuck out to me, I won't lie, and it's funny because I'm very good friends with him now, was the pilot for Nip Tuck was pretty fucking good. I mean, Ryan Murphy, is a really, he's a really, really strong writer. And I do remember that being like, oh shit, like this is a really fucking good script.
Right.
But at that moment, I'm like, fuck it, I'm going to try to do this myself. So I wrote a spec pilot. I sent it to this agent, and he was like, you know what? Good. It's really good. But he's like, I can't fuck with baby writers. Like, it's just that's not what I'm doing. So he turned me on to a manager, guy named Adam Kolbrenner. He signed me. And then, again, I'm breezing through literally a couple of years.
Oh, I know, man. I know.
And by the way, let me just be clear, like, and this, Pete, working multiple jobs and raising kids. Yes. And like sweating every penny I have, not being able to pay my mortgage, like literally, really at one point my power and water shut the fuck off, know.
But the engine of the engine all that time is exactly like what you talked about feeling when reading those 50 scripts. Like you got to have that, like, man, put me in, coach. Like, that's right. Like I get 4 points on these motherfuckers. You know what I mean? Like I'm not gonna be Jordan, but like I'm not gonna miss if I'm open. And, that's right. And you need that kind of like belief in yourself and that kind of level of like. I had a conversation with Mike Coulter. We were talking about taste, right, and how important that is in the journey. Because before you can execute, if you don't have taste, you don't have a North Star. So like,
absolutely.
yeah, man.
And I'll say this, and it's funny, again, having listened to your story, which again, I don't know how much you've shared of it on this podcast, but one thing this business will do for most people is it's going to test how badly you want it, right? It's going to test how badly you want it. It's going to say to you, listen, you're going to have to work multiple jobs. You're not going to have a fucking penny in your pocket. You're going to have to go through all that shit. And if you're willing to do all that, then guess what? This is probably the right career for you. That's
right.
But if you go, and by the way, there's no shame in saying, you know what, that's not for me. There's absolutely no shame in that. But that is what this business will do to you. And by the way, it'll do that to you even after you've quote unquote arrived, which is like what people don't understand is just how, like, you know, when you're in business school, they'll talk about lumpy revenues, which is like, you know, like sometimes your revenues are up, sometimes that's what this business is too. It's like, you're up and then you're down and then you're up and then you're down. It's very, very hard. Although for TV directors, it's a slightly better journey, but for writers, listen, man, you know, you are always, always, always worried about your next job. You just are, because you don't fucking know. And look, you know, I have a series on the air right now, you know, I'm about to go to set right after this and I have some other shit, but shit, I don't know, Pete. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. You just can never call it. And that's not for everyone. And I'll be honest, for myself, I don't know that it's for me. You know?
Well, I mean,
what I'll say is, like, emotionally, like, and look, you have a new daughter, right? Or somewhat new.
Yeah.
The calculus changes once you have a kid. I mean, you know it and I know it. Because
I've always,
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I've always believed, and I believe this, I mean, forever. For some reason, it was ingrained in me, but I've always felt like, you know, I'd rather have 9 horrible months, you know what I mean? Knowing that the things I'm working on in that 9-month period and way before, it might just be one good day in the 11th month that would be exponentially better than had I want to choose the right words because I don't want it to sound negative, but had I chosen to remain in a 9 to 5, you know what I mean? Like, but that's an appetite of risk that you need to be able to stomach.
Absolutely. And again, like, it's one thing to do all the shit you did when you were at NYU, your NYU hustle, when it's just you. It's another thing when you come home to your baby daughter and you're like, oh fuck. You know, that's a very, very different calculation.
Sure.
And it's, but yeah, I mean, it's just not for everyone. And I will say this too, not to be all, you know, again, to use your word, not too negative, but look, the business is at a real weird point right now. And, you know, I was having this conversation, I think we talked about this a little bit on set, where my older son not too long ago asked me, like, well, what would you think if I wanted to get into this? I was like, man, I don't know. You know, I don't know that this is, I'm not sure I'd recommend it, at least not right now. Cause it doesn't, this is a real mature industry, right? And it's contracting. And when you're in a mature industry, and this is more business school speak, it's like, you know, your revenues are kind of what your revenues are. It's real hard to grow them too much. So the only levers you really have are cost. Managing costs, which is what we're seeing in our business right now, you know, making fewer shows and making those shows for less than we did before.
Or going, I had a conversation with a studio development team yesterday, and it was like, we're leaning back toward multicam. Multicam is cheaper, you know, and I'm like, damn, maybe I need to go do a multicam. So I have one on the resume if that's where we're going to be for a couple years, you know?
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's funny. 50 was on set last night, and, you know, he bought all these stages out in Shreveport, and he was talking about that. He's like, because Tyler Perry is functioning as somewhat of a mentor for him in terms of this studio purchase he made. And, you know, 50's kind of like, Tyler's like, get into the multicam world. That's, you know, and listen, I think there's something to be said for that. You know, I mean, I do think that's where the business is going on some level. It's cheap and you can make a lot of them. So
we'll see, man. Well,
tough.
not to squash the timeline again, but like what was so that you took that opportunity to kind of show and prove, and then you had your production company. You were continuing to kind of produce and do things in that space. Like, what was the next transition for you?
So the next transition was, I started to get pretty consistently busy as a writer. Like I sold a bunch of pilots. One of them got made.
And what year is this, if you don't mind sharing?
I mean, I feel like the first pilot I got made was like in 2008, maybe.
Okay.
2009. It was whenever Hurricane Sandy was. When was Hurricane Sandy? I don't even remember.
Oh man, that was like
2012?
11 or 12. Yeah.
Okay, but that was but I had sold some specs at that point. I had it seemed at the time to be a pretty big spec sale of this, and it was really of this feature that I wrote called The Ditch. That was to Warner Brothers. I had been sort of, but meanwhile, I still had this production company that I was working at with my business partner at the time, and we were splitting all the money, including my writing money.
Right.
And then, but I did start to get pretty busy. A lot of pilots, and I don't know for the people who are listening to this how much they understand about the business, but like you can sell pilots and write pilots. I mean, the business was different back then, and they never get made, but you still get paid for writing the pilot. That's one thing about a writer as it relates to TV is like we get paid for trying, which is nice.
Right.
So I was pretty consistently busy, and at a certain point, I said to my business partner, "I'm like, listen, you know what? I'm just gonna go like head on into this writing thing, and." And that's kind of a solo venture because it wasn't like we were writing together. It wasn't like we were writing partners. And so that's what I did. And, it's a little bit of a leap of faith. I had to bet on myself. And let me be clear, like there were some real tough years, real tough years. And I had written a few specs that didn't sell. And again, I don't know how aware, like a spec, when I say a spec for people that don't know, basically, that's me. I write a feature film, or it could be a TV script, but no one's paying me to write it, whatever. I write it, and then I put it out into the world and see if someone will buy it.
Right.
Now, that's a lot easier said than done when you have representation. Much harder to do when you don't have representation, right? Because your agents and managers can put it in people's hands who can buy shit. If you don't have an agent or manager, it's much harder to do that. Like, basically, if you don't have an agent or manager, and again, I don't know how much of this show is for people that are trying to break into the business or whatever.
Oh yeah, no, it is. It's all good.
Yeah. So, if you don't have an agent or manager, like you would use a spec to try to get an agent or manager, frankly, because it's a writing sample. But I had taken some big swings. I had missed and wasn't able to, and then things got real scary financially. And I ended up taking a job on Power. This was after that pilot was made. I took a job as a producer on Power.
Right. Wait, can I pit stop 1 second? Because I feel like what's very impressive is there's probably a volume, and I don't know if you know how many things you wrote, but like clearly you were writing a lot of stuff.
A ton.
And what was like your metric for, like, where were these ideas coming from? Like, what was your process? Do you have like when before I started working in TV consistently, I was like, I got to make something every quarter. Like I had a framework to push myself. Like, what was it that was driving you, and how were you coming up with these ideas?
I mean, I'll be completely honest. What was driving me was desperation. I mean, for real. Like, and I think you do need that a little bit.
Yeah.
Let me be clear. I think that's
no plan B. This is it.
Yep. I think that's a big part of being successful in anything, by the way. Let me be clear. But what had happened for me, and I know that this happened for you too, is that even though I wasn't selling stuff, I had sold some stuff, and I did start to think to myself, you know what, I'm pretty good at this. Like I don't suck. Let's put it that way. And and I was like, and maybe because listen, I'd had multiple careers at this point. You know what I'm saying? This was like this is my last career, but I'd had multiple careers before this, And I was like, okay, I'm pretty good at this. I you do have to have this like almost irrational belief in yourself because you get so many no's. It's a business of no. And so and I'm sure it's the same way for your wife, right? Like when you're an actress, it's very similar.
Yeah.
And what you have to be able to do is not take it personally and not like, and again, this is all about this is about the work testing you.
Right.
It's like, how many no's can you take before you throw up your hands, right?
Right.
How many can you fucking take?
Right.
And in this business, you have to be able to take them
infinite. Yeah,
absolutely.
exactly.
Absolutely. And, you know, and so I just kept, and to your point, like, dude, I was prolific, bro. I mean, like, I can write, when I'm on one, I can write 10 pages a day.
Right.
And the specs that I've sold, and this is what's crazy, most of the specs that I've sold, I've written in somewhere between 2 to 3 weeks.
Now, do you like outline you just sit there and you're like fucking typing?
In my head, I know the first act and I feel like I know the third act. I'll figure out the second act as I go.
But that's the hardest part.
It is.
The second act is where everything falls apart.
Correct.
So then you feel very confident that you can walk into the fire and your keyboard in your mind is the extinguisher.
I feel very confident that after 2.5 to 3 weeks, I will have a draft that I feel like is 65 to 70% there. And then I feel like in the next 2 weeks, I can get it to 90, 95%, right?
Because there's something about just having a document that you can print out that 100%. is the biggest hurdle.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And by the way, finishing something is also a big hurdle for a lot of writers, right?
Right.
And it's always like whenever I meet a writer who's like, oh man, I've been working on this script for like, you know, last 18 months or 2 years. I'm like, dude, you're fucking up.
Right.
Like,
right.
Because what I learned about myself, Pete, is like, if in 2 to 3 weeks I can get a script that's 65% of the way there, like, why would I take 6 months to get a script that's 85%? Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
right.
The math doesn't make sense.
Right.
You know? And
but
so
see, that's also a left brain, right brain, like handshake.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like I'm a firm believer too. And like, you know, a finished project is always better than an idea, you know,
100%.
and there's people with better ideas than me that didn't have them as links to share or to or videos or films to submit. So like, it's a volume game. Like
it is.
There was this Tupac line. It was like, another album out. That's what I'm about. More.
Yeah.
You know, and like, that's kind of, hate to put that burden on people listening, but it's a volume game because you meet new people with every project, you know, and you get a new audience of people who want to see the next fucking project, and rinse, repeat. 5 years from now, you might have a real loyal fan base, even if it's niche.
You got it. That's exactly right. And the other thing you cannot do is get precious about anything. You cannot be like, oh, this is my baby. It's like, no, it's not.
Right.
You know, and again, that's like, that's like, I mean, if you say that, then you've never had a baby, right? Like, you don't know.
Right.
And one of the things I also sort of harp on with my kids as well is, it's like, this is a fucking job. You're not someone, you're not special. This is just what you do.
Right.
This is what you do. So don't treat it like you're working some rarefied no, dude. Like you got to put your nose to the fucking grindstone, right? Mm-hmm. As my manager said to me the first time I ever fucking met with him, he's like, writers write. If you're a writer, then guess what? You should be writing. That's your fucking job. That's what it is. Directors direct. So guess what? If you're a director, then you need to be, and you're trying to break into it, you should be scrimping and saving whatever to direct shit. You should be going out to try to direct shit any chance you can fucking get. Because that's what, if you're going to call yourself that, then you better fucking do that.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And so that's the thing I also feel like people get caught up in is like, well, no, I work in the entertainment, you know, I'm a writer. Like, that's, dude, you're no different than, you know, the mechanic I was talking about earlier. Like,
Right.
You clock in, you clock the fuck out. Like,
right.
And by the way, like, to your point, it's a volume business. The more shit you write, the better the chance you have of one of those things catching on and you selling that. That's just, or to your point, it gets you meetings. It gets you have to, and by the way, it's also just like anything else. And I'm going on a rant. It's like the more you do it, the better you're going to get.
Exactly. No, you have to. I mean, I just had this revelation, yesterday, because for folks listening, we're recording this 2 days after the election.
Yeah.
So take that how you need to take that. But like I did a radio podcast. I mean, an audio podcast a few years back that was going to be a short film that was about, it was kind of like like Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie. It's like the day after an authoritarian gets reelected. Oh, wow. And this daughter comes home to this dinner and shit ensues. And I'm like, you know what? I need to make that thing. Yeah. I need to make it. You know what I mean? Like, it didn't set the world on fire as a narrative podcast. It's great. Like, I think it's fucking great. Yep. And, my wife was in it, Coleman Domingo, Spencer Garrett. So all these folks as voices. And I'm like, I need to film it and put this out there to, be a director, even though I got months upon months of work, thank you. But it's to what you're saying, man, you got to do it. You got to move you got to be driven by the impulse, and you got to follow it, and you got to, show your unique vision, and a spec is your opportunity to do that as a writer, right?
Absolutely. And listen, I'm not going to lie, the payoff with what we do is different than other jobs, right? That's where we are different, right? Like, the idea that we can do something that millions of people interact with on something, that's a really powerful and incredible feeling to have. Yeah. I'm not going to lie, like, and so that's where it's different. But in terms of the act of creating and all the rest, it's just like anything else, man. You have to do it. It's funny, as I think I said earlier, like, I went through a divorce not too long ago, and my therapist, he's like, you need to be out there dating and all this other stuff. And I was like, oh man. And I went on a few dates or whatever, and I was like, yeah, I don't think I can, like, this just isn't, I'm not really enjoying this that much. And he was like, here's the thing. You got to date 40 people before you meet one person you might even kind of like. Yeah. And it's the same thing with what we do, man. You got to have 40 pieces out there before one of them, and I'm sure you can relate to this. Like, I have, to your point, I have like 7 or 8 things right now that are sort of in various stages of whatever. And then I have probably 8 ideas for features and a few ideas for TV that I'm also like actively trying to get started on, or, so you can't stop. You can't, there's no opportunity to kick up your feet. Now, look, I don't know what it's like to be Steve Zalian. I don't know what it's like to be, one of these huge writers. I don't know if they have a different experience. My guess is that they don't, to be honest. But for me, in terms of where I sit in the industry, which is, in a decent spot for sure. Like, in fact, I think if 25 or 29-year-old me was looking at me now, I'd be like, holy shit. Like, okay, good for you. Right. But I can't stop. I have to keep pushing, because it's not like, just to be perfectly blunt, it's not like I make enough money where I can just be like, okay, I'm good. Right. Okay? That's just not my life.
Hi, I'm Kelly McCreary, and you are watching Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon. Transitions, a director's journey and motivational handbook, is Pete Chatmon's book from Michael Weezy Productions. The reviews are in. Greg Berlanti says, there's a reason why everyone who works with Pete falls in love with his work. The lessons he imparts here are invaluable. Do yourself a favor and read it cover to cover. From Sarah Gamble, Pete's sharing gold nuggets that will spare you a ton of wasted time and help you channel your drive, talent, and ambition in the most productive way. And from Jesse Williams, this business has everything to do with preparation and expectations. Transitions grounds lessons in reality while empowering our artistry to run free. Not an easy balance to execute. Transitions, a director's journey and motivational handbook, is available on Amazon and anywhere else you get your books. Don't forget about your mom and pop shops, people.
Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon is sponsored by the good folks at Scriptation. Scriptation is the Emmy Award-winning app for production that allows you to mark up scripts, transfer notes, generate breakdowns, and so much more. Personally, I use Scriptation daily on every production that I am involved with. While directing episode 106 of NCIS Origins, I took advantage of Scriptation's photo feature to organize my blocking for the episode's main set piece. We turned a restaurant with one entry point into a multi-level club with private rooms and back alleys, and sharing the photos in my script helped my department heads bring it to life. This is just one of the ways I use the incredible features inside of Scriptation. Go to scriptation.com/Pete to get an exclusive 20% off Scriptation's premium toolkit, Scriptation Industry Pro. Before we get to coming on to Power, do you think up until that point, I think you said it was 2016, do you think you could put a number on how many things you had written? And I'm talking about unproduced, everything.
Well, look, I didn't start writing in earnest until, God, I don't even remember. I mean, I didn't really start writing until I'm going to say now 2006 or 7, I didn't actually sit down and start writing until then. So between 2007 and let's say 2016 or whatever, I mean, I'm going to say I wrote probably, 20 spec features. I'm going to guess maybe 15,
Right.
It's funny. I have a folder of all my shit and
Right.
it's a million different pitches, probably 15 pilots at that point, cause there was a minute there where I was selling a couple pilots a year, 2-3 pilots a year,
Right. Right.
So I was writing so much, man, every single day. I had an office at Sunset Gower and actually this is even before that, I would write at Coffee Bean. I would write at, and I was working this other job too. So I would write in the office. I would go in early after I drop, or I'd stay late or whatever. Then I'd go home. I put my kids to bed. I think put my son to bed, and my daughter at the time was older, and I would right after that. It was nonstop. It was nonstop, and it was really fueled by. There's also another piece of this which, I'm sure you can relate to as well. There's also a competitive aspect of this as well. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There is this whole thing of I mean, if you've ever played sports, you're shit, I want to raise my hand in the air at the end. I won this shit,
Right.
But there is a competitive aspect to it as well. I do think that two of the really important engines for me have been desperation and competition,
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm curious for you though, when you were doing all that stuff at NYU, were there moments of doubt? Were there moments of just I don't know, is this really, because you didn't come out to LA till later, which I thought was
till late. Yeah, man. I mean, I'll cut myself off because sometimes I don't like the connotations of a word. I was going to say I had resigned myself, but I don't like how that sounds.
Right.
I had chosen to be happy with a life where I just did what I did, had a job that allowed me to live out as much creativity as I could, and I would make as many things as I could within the confines of those of those opportunities. So like when I started shadowing all these TV shows, I literally was probably the only person in the history of shadowing, that's presumptuous, but who was I'm not here to get a job. I am here to get a job, but I'm not here to get a job. I'm here to take what I see happen on these sets and bring it back to my next short film or indie feature so I can be better with time and better with crew and better with fucking money. And because of that, and this was a bit of a pivot after someone in a program, we were doing our 30-second bios, and she was like, "You sound bitter." And I was like, "Huh, I am."
Yeah.
I am bitter. So
Yeah.
I'm doing everything they told me to do.
Yeah.
And and the dots aren't connecting. And so that was like a big wake-up call for me. And so I took expectation out of the conversation, out of the energy expenditure. And I just said, how do I just fucking bring everything back to what I'm trying to do? And that really opened things up for me, man, because that bitterness, like you think you've shoved it, somewhere in your back pocket, and it's like it's fucking painted on your face. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So and so it's a bit of an interesting question, because like two things existed at the same time, and it even is happening now, like with the film project. Like I know it will get made. I think it deserves to get made. I know I'll kill it, but at the same time, I know it might not get made.
Right.
So it's like, how can I kind of exist at like 0 and 100 at the same time with equilibrium, without like fucking shitting on the journey, and you know what I mean, man. I do. It's an emotional like governance that maybe it's not real. Because it takes, like, you could pull a gun on me, I'd be like, fuck, okay, here we go. Like I just be like, it is what it is. Like, what can I do?
But I think that's really helpful to like hear, even for me, like, because it does again speak to what it means to do what we do, which is like, I always say this, like, we can do everything about our jobs flawlessly and correctly and still fail, and that's just part of the bargain, right?
Yeah.
And you can get within nanometers of the starting line, and then all of a sudden, they've moved it 15 miles away. And you have to have resilience is such a huge part of what the fuck we do. And I will tell you, that's helped me in my personal life as well, right? Like, and it's funny, I was thinking as you were talking, and on some level, this conversation's been so therapeutic after the last couple of days. And
same here, man.
Yeah. And one of the things that I've been thinking about as you were talking, and is like, it's real fucked up what's happened over the last couple of days. But listening to us talk, right? Look at how far we've come. Look at the journey that we've taken. Look at how much can change, right? And look at, you and I both had some incredibly dark and desperate days early on in our career. And here we are talking about our careers retrospectively, like, look what the fuck we did.
Right.
And I think for me, it's helpful to think about that within the context of where we are in this country right this second, which is as dark as it seems today on Thursday, 2 days after the election. Listen, man, there's a long ways to go.
Yeah.
And a lot
always will be.
Yes. And a lot can happen, and a lot and good things can happen and bad things can happen and all the rest of that. But this isn't the end. It's only the end if you tell yourself it's the end. It's only the end if you say, fuck it, I'm done. But we don't have the luxury of doing that, because we're here and we're not fucking going anywhere. And so we have to think about what comes next rather than focusing on all this others. And I will say, like, this conversation has really, I didn't think about it until you were talking. And it's like, I think that's a helpful thing to remember, that, like, as bad as it feels right now, it's going to feel different later. And I would argue that ultimately we get better. As much as it feels like we've gotten worse, I do believe we will get better. I have to believe that, because if I don't do that, then again, it's like, then fuck it, I'm done.
Yeah. And everything is cyclical, and perhaps there's a saving grace of, like, there are similar things that were done in the 80s you know, policy wise that were masked with cool terminology that only if you knew what the dog whistle was, would you be aware of what was in store. 100%. And maybe there's value in it being out clear, the quiet part being spoken, because now, you know, for those who will respond, at least before it becomes doomsday, they don't have to be convinced of something that's a little, you know, subtextual.
Yep.
I don't know, man.
Yeah, no, listen, man. I mean, I completely agree. It's funny. I was talking to my fiance yesterday and she was like, look, America's an experiment, right? Which it is. And it's like, well, it is an experiment. And now we're going to see what this version of the experiment gets us. My sense is it's not going to go great. Right. But here we go. We're about to do this trial and let's see what it yields. It's a scary part of the trial for those of us who feel like, you know, we're on the wrong side of it. But, you know, look, we don't have, again, it's like how badly, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about our careers, right? How badly do you want it? Right? How badly do you want fucking democracy, bro? Because if you really want it, you're going to have to fucking fight for it. It's not going to make it easy on you. It's not. They're going to be, to your point, like you were talking about Reagan. Look, I would argue that there are things about Reagan that are that were just as dangerous, even more dangerous. And that's what you were saying. As what we're talking about right now. And also in terms of what he did to this country, in the world, right? So, yeah, I mean, you know, it's real easy to get to feel like there's no hope, but that's like the easy way out. Man.
Yeah, man. Well, I want to be respectful of your time.
Sure.
And I know we were about to get into the power of it all. So yeah, let's continue down that road. And then I kind of want to ask you about some stuff about directors, because I gotta get in that world from a showrunner.
So it's funny because I had a DGA rep on set last night, and I got into a long conversation with him. So then I'm not gonna lie, I had met Courtney Kemp. I had met with her because I had read a spec of hers that was set sort of in the NFL. And I was meeting with her as a possible writer on this NBC pilot I was talking about earlier that I shot right around Hurricane Sandy. We really got along well. She had she had just submitted, I think, the pilot script for Power to Stars. And she's like, look, I might have this other thing going on. If this doesn't work out, you know, I'm going to circle back on you. And I was like, that'd be great. So she did. And I went on to the first season of Power. And you know, that was my first experience in a writer's room. You know, I'd been in the business at that point for fucking probably 12 years or some shit. I'd never been in a writer's room. And I will tell you, like, the first day on the job, I was like, oh my God, we get paid to do this? Like, because as someone who had toiled away, you know, in this sort of solitary existence of just like sitting all of a sudden you're in a room with like, you know, 8 other people who are all pitching ideas, who are all really smart and all really cool. All of a sudden you're like, oh my God, this is like incredible. Like it really was that first day. I
got a team now.
100%. Absolutely. I don't have to come up with everything. Like it was so incredible. And Courtney's really, really smart. And actually, you know, I would say that she probably runs a room probably, you know, the best of just about anyone. And I'll also add that, like, you know, 50, you know, his insights and all the rest of that and guidance. I mean, one of the things that's underrated about 50, although if you listen to his music, you'll get it, is like, he's a storyteller. Like he is. And he knows how to identify story, like in a way that's kind of like, almost like he's a savant. Do you know what I mean? And so, you know, it's like this perfect mix. And there were all these great writers in there, like, and writers have gone on to do great things, like Randy Huggins, who ran BMF for a while. And then Raphael Jackson, Damian Macedon, who did Genius, the MLK Malcolm X one, Lauren Schmidt, Hisrick, who runs The Witcher now, Vladimir Svetko, who's number 2 on The Penguin. So it's just amazing. A lot of like amazing writers, you know, and it was just like, it was really great. But I'm not going to lie, like as I was doing it, I was like, I need to be running a show. This is not mine. And that was just my own arrogance, to be honest. Like, what a dick, right?
But here you are.
Yeah. So after one season, I was like, you know what? Like, I don't want to work for someone else. I want to work for myself. And which was really dumb on some level, but whatever. I got real fortunate that I sold some really big specs right around this time. Like I started to make some really, at least for me, life-changing money. And by life-changing, it was just like all of a sudden I didn't have to worry about money in the way I was.
Right.
And started, selling more pilots, this, that, the other, got another pilot made at CBS called Main Justice with Bokeem Woodbine and Timothy Hutton and Peter Gallagher. That didn't go anywhere. And then, but I was making a decent living as a writer. And I don't even know that you could do what I was doing then now, to be honest, because the spec market was really good back then. And then lo and behold, 6 years ago, Courtney called me up and said, listen, 50 and I have this idea for sort of like Goodfellas set in the world of power, this sort of throwback to Kanan. Are you interested? And I was like, sure, but I will tell you, and I don't think I'm sharing any secrets. Like there were a few power shows at that particular moment that were in development. There was my show, Raising Kanan. There was the Tommy show, which was Force.
Right.
And then there was another one, the one with Lorenz Tate attached, based on his character from Power. And of those three, my sense was the one I was doing was the one that they were sort of least interested in. But I will tell you that era for me, like I was in New York at that time,
right.
When Kanan is set. A little bit later is when I was working at Harlem Hospital. So I was like, this is like the strike zone for me. And I felt like that pilot, I was like, shit, I know exactly what this is. And when I turned it in, I was like, this is a good ass pilot. Like I don't know that means listen, I've written great stuff that's gone nowhere.
Right.
But, I think I was the first pilot to get turned in of those three shows. And they were like, you know what? Let's do it. Let's open a room. And so they opened a room, which didn't mean it was going to series. And, first room I've ever run, came up with the whole season, then presented it to Starz and Lionsgate. And they're like, all right, let's go. And they ordered it to series. And here we are. Look, again, this was all, then the pandemic happened and the strike happened and I got divorced and my dad died. It was like so much shit happened over the last 5 years, but here we are. Like I'm essentially 2 episodes away from finishing up the series. And
it's a great series, man. I think it's got a lot of heart, and I feel like just like the eyes through which we view this world, a world that we all presume to know so well,
right?
But getting to view it through Kanan and Rock's eyes is such a. I almost, since we've been talking about hip hop a lot too, I feel like when Reasonable Doubt came out, it was just this much of a pivot of like. Yeah. I have like some regrets about the shit that I did. Yeah. You know what I mean? And just that little pivot elevated the content. Yep. And I feel like seeing this world we know with that little bit of a pivot is what's most interesting about it.
And I think for me, what was interesting was sort of like, because one of the things I said early on to 50 and Courtney was, look, the challenge is everyone knows how this story ends. Right, so we got to make it really interesting for people. And that, again, being the son of a psychiatrist and also having someone who has a very complicated relationship with my own mother, for me, I was like, okay, well, the story is going to be about, of course, how does a kid become that?
Right.
Right. And that once I sort of like figured out that it was going to be about him and his mother on some level, I was like, oh, okay, I know exactly what this is. And look, I think, and I maybe I said this to you when we were on set together, there's this Warren Littlefield book called Top of the Rock, I think. Warren Littlefield, he used to run NBC, sort of during NBC's heyday. And the book's okay. But there's one thing he says that I think super smart, which is he's like, every great show that becomes super successful ultimately is a family drama. He's like, whether it's Friends or Seinfeld, he's like, whether it's a half hour, an hour, at the end of the day, whether it's ER or what, it becomes a family drama because what people are invested in are the relationships between these characters. That's what they care about. That's what they want to watch.
Right.
And I think that's so true. Right. And that's what this has always, people are always like, oh, it's a drug show. It's a this, it's a that. It's like, nah, man, this is a family fucking drama. That's what it's always been. Yeah. Yes, it's set in this world, but ultimately the themes of this show are the same themes you'd see in, name your Little House on the fucking Prairie. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's that. So,
it's also a workplace comedy, to some, it can be depending upon the scene. It's all those things, man. That's a very accurate assessment.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, let's talk about directors. I feel like I can't miss an opportunity to have someone who's looking at the interpretation of their work from directors talk about what works and what doesn't. What are the ingredients, I guess, for like the best collaboration between you and a director?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think I've learned so much about that over the last 5 years. I think the ingredients, like any good relationship, first off, communication, right? Like it really is, like that's really important. And not feeling like any sort of it's not personal.
Right.
We're just we're all moving in the same direction. We want this to be the best version that it can be, right? So communication is really, really important. Like if there's a scene that you and I are shooting together and, at the end of the scene, I've written that the actor walks off and exits and you're like, I'd like for the actor to sit there, at the end of it and sort of be fake. That's cool. But let's talk about that before we're on set.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Because for me, when directors get in trouble is when they start to unconsciously write, when they start to rewrite scenes. And that can really be a result of blocking, right? Like I remember you and I were on set talking. There was a scene that we were shooting with Rock and another character, and they were walking through this park. We're trying to figure out how to... And at one point we were talking about the possibility that we come in and they're already walking and talking. And at first I was like, yeah, it makes sense. And then I thought about it, I'm like, but wait, what were they talking about before?
Right.
Because it feels like and it's like, and you of course instinctively got that. You're like, oh yeah, exactly. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's like, we have to come from a place of story. And I think what some directors don't do is think about that kind of stuff. Look, if you don't want that character to exit the scene, that's fine. But you have to tell me why, from a story perspective, they're not exiting the scene. What's going to happen after we're no longer what are they saying when we're no longer shooting? You know what I'm saying?
Right. And where are they going? Like moments from now, what was the destination?
Absolutely. Yeah. So communication is really, really important, and by the way, that's also for the showrunner as well. Like a good showrunner is gonna do that. I think humility is also important, for everyone involved. Because again, we're all headed in the same direction. And one thing about being a director on television is like you're visiting.
Right.
The rest of us live here.
Right.
But you're visiting. And so like any guest, you gotta be respectful of, the home that you've stepped into. And some directors don't get that as much as others do, to be honest. And they're rough on the crew in ways that, frankly, run counter to their own success.
And by that, are you talking about like just fucking like demeanor or like, what are you talking about?
I think it's demeanor, but it's also, again, on some level, humility, which is like our prop guy knows more about some shit than you'll ever know, right, as it relates to this show.
Right.
So you should hear him out. Don't dismiss what he's saying because you're like, oh, that's it. No, listen, I learned so much from, the guy who does on-set props for us is a guy named Sean Miller. Sean is
great.
A critical piece of what I do. Sean is of that era, knows that era.
Right.
He's in my ear all the time, giving me stuff that I immediately like, oh, dude, you're 100% fucking right. you know?
Right.
And so, I think, and that's like, every director needs to understand how valuable each person is to them, and how important they are to their success. So I think that's another piece of it. Thinking about story first. Look, you are hands down one of the most prepared directors we've ever had on King. And for the audience listening, I've tried to get you for years and years and years, and we couldn't. But and listen, I wouldn't be doing this, if working with you hadn't been a complete and total pleasure. And I didn't feel
Likewise,
like
man.
you weren't, one of the best at what you do, and you come in having, I'm assuming most people listening to this haven't seen, your iPad and seeing how you've marked each shit and each beat. And it's like that type of preparation is so important, And so you have a clear and distinct vision for what you're doing when you step into each scene. That fills everyone with a tremendous amount of confidence, because what you can see is that when you have a director who hasn't done that and people don't know what the fuck they're doing, morale sinks real low, real fast. Because everyone's like, oh shit, there's no captain at the wheel here. We're fucked. And then what happens is that comes back to me, and then I have to step in.
Right. And now you're taken away from the finale of the whole show because you've got to come handle something that was not your job.
Correct. And it's funny. So I'll circle this back because there's a question I want to hear your thoughts on this. So had this DJ rep come through last night and sort of having a conversation about something that happened on set. And I said to him, let me ask you a question. Like, what happens when there's a director and I'm giving a director the same note 5 times and they just don't execute the note? They blow me off. Or they're not communicating in a way that the actors understand or the camera department. What do I do in that situation? Because part of the conversation was like me talking directly to the actors. That was part of what we were talking about. And the response I got back was, you got to fire that director. And I was like,
wasn't expecting that, but okay.
I wasn't either, to be honest, Pete. Like, I was like, really? And I was like, no, there's no middle ground. I said, and by the way, I'm a member of the DGA. Let me be clear.
Right.
And I think that, I feel like in protecting the director's sort of, power, so to speak, on the DGA is actually doing the directors a disservice a little bit in that. And what I said to him is like, what's so fucked up is like, you're basically giving this all or nothing proposition. I said, but I believe that there's a lot, especially a young director, and we've given a lot of young directors shots on this show, can learn from seeing the writer or the showrunner, in my case, speak to the cast and tell them, like, look, this is what I'm trying to do. Because by the way, I learned so much stuff from watching you do your shit, or Mario Van Peebles, or Rob Hardy, or whatever. I mean, I'll be honest, Mario Van Peebles directed the 2nd episode of this series. I learned more from him about how to talk to actors than...
Right.
And so I'm just sort of curious, like, your thoughts on that. Like, because obviously, and for people listening, there are very sort of rigid guidelines that the DGA sets forth about writers, directors on set, and who can talk to the actors, and all the rest of that. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
So there's so much nuance in all of this, right? Because, from what you were saying just minutes ago, it's like being a visiting director. It's like you have the term director, which you can look up a definition and feel like it's, like you're working by fiat, but you're not, right?
Right.
And not everybody understands how that is applied to TV. The analogy I use, again, election might be a good opportunity, is like, it's like if the president couldn't change the cabinet. I view it like that, right? Like I go to all these shows and like, this is my Secretary of State, the warmongering motherfucker, right? You know what I mean? And like, and then this, and so like, I just have to like figure out how to work with these folks to do what the show is asking. And so I do believe in like the notes go through the director, but I also am comfortable with, hey, do you want to give that? Because sometimes I know like if it becomes, sometimes I know what the actor's been saying to me. I see that we're not hitting the mark, and I know like I'm comfortable enough to be like, Sascha, have at it, because there's probably 3 more questions after the fucking statement that I'm only gonna need clarification from you on anyway. So like, but I feel like if you are anchored in this, like, if you're too fully anchored in it, this my set thing, it can only expose you for what you don't know. And so for me, I'm personally not trying to be exposed for not knowing shit. Yep. So I would rather have somebody kind of join me in that. Now, I have had issues with folks that were like directing from Los Angeles while I was in Vancouver, or like, I mean, coming in and like, this was a whole thing, but I had a PD shoot the rehearsal, and then I was marking this rehearsal now with the crew around, and then I'm handed a phone from the showrunner in LA trying to get me to change what we've agreed upon. And it's just like, and it happened several times, and it was one of those things where it's like, there's like what you were talking about with the end of a scene, and it's like they're seated and not having a reason for that, but then there's like, you just wrote dialogue, which meant this was left for interpretation. You didn't write where they were supposed to be, and so now this is like a kind of it's a kind of wild thing to get this call saying the person shouldn't be in the chair when you wrote nothing about chairs at all. Right. So, and that's a bit tangential. I don't think that contributes to your answer. Yeah. But like, I guess it's really like, how do you find that nuance? Like if you are giving that note, and it sounds like you were giving this note to the director and they were just unable to relay it to the actor.
Yeah, was last night. It was something else. Last night it was just the guy who's directing the current episode's a friend, and I just and he, by the way, he didn't give a fuck. It was any of the DGA rep. But no, I've had experiences with other directors where I've given the note like multiple times, and it was just disregarded. Or again, like a director changed a scene, like fundamentally changed what was written, right, and. Again, the rep's response was, well, then you need to fire them, which to me feels crazy. And yet maybe that's how that's the way to do it.
It does sound like, this is like, as you get older, they say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And the older I get, I'm like, that shit true. But like, it doesn't sound like, even if you're moving through your day like that as a director, it is probably unlikely that some conversation is going to land on you. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like if you had a convo about like, hey, this is the way, and I need this, but it probably sounds like somebody who's going to come from the complete other side of like, well, now I'm directing and this is what it's going to be. So I don't know. Sometimes I don't know if you can bridge the gap.
Yeah, it's funny. I said to this DGA rep, I said, I feel like I get why you're saying that, but like to your point, Pete, like I said to him, I'm like, listen, man, there's only 2 things in my life I'm an expert on: myself and raising Kanan. That's it. Those are the only 2 things. And so what you're saying is like you have the world's foremost expert on something, like literally. The world's foremost expert. No one knows more than this person about this subject matter. Right. And what you're saying is like that person can only speak through you to get when it's like well, really all I need to do is walk in and tell the actor, like, look, just this is what I want tonally.
Right.
And they'll get it right away. But instead the answer, and the director is not getting me that. And the director, and the director, in my opinion, could learn a tremendous amount just seeing that interaction, right? Like, this is how you say, but what the mandate is essentially is like, well, no, if the director can't get it, then they just got to go. And it's like, well, I don't think that's helpful for the director or the show or anybody.
Yeah, there's gotta be. Oh man, I mean, it's like I'm thinking of other examples of that, like when you have an actor that just doesn't get it, and all the conversations in the world aren't gonna elicit the performance that you're looking for, but you still gotta, get through the season. I don't know, man. That's just a rough.
And let me be very clear also, like, I have worked with quite a few directors, including you, by the way, who are like, come on in and come talk to the actor with me. They're fine with it. They're absolutely fine with it. And it is the real tension for a showrunner, I'll be honest. Like, it's like, there have been so many times where it's like, I will sit through take after take after take after take. That isn't what I want or need. And I know I can fix it in literally 5 seconds.
Right.
But I can't.
Right.
Because there's a communication breakdown between the director and the actor. And so, again, like, the DGA answer to that is, well, you need to fire the director. Well, okay, but do you realize how much money that's going to cost me? Because then I got to get another director. First, I have to pay that director out. Then I got to get another director in here tomorrow.
Right.
To direct the rest of this thing. And who knows if I can. And it's just, I don't know. I feel like what we're trying to do, and look, this entire thing that we do exists in a gray area. It's people working together. It's, and so to place super rigid guidelines, or it's problematic, and it doesn't take into account just the vagaries of human interaction.
You know what this makes me think? I just read this in an article. I think it was from Kellyanne Conway's husband, George Conway.
Yeah.
And he was talking about, like, all the, like, kind of institutional things that have been designed, from the Constitution to the way the government works, to prevent, an autocratic leader.
Yeah.
But we learned that you can't protect it from the people.
Right.
Right. And so, like,
I was in the Atlantic. I read the exact same thing.
You know what I'm talking about? And so, like, it feels like everything as kind of like an exoskeleton makes perfect sense. Right. Yep. But then in those rare cases when you get someone, a person, whatever, people who are kind of working against its best designed, like, principles, then the framework doesn't allow nuance.
Yep.
And that's the problem. So then it's like, well, it's like, is it a hiring thing? Are there conversations that can happen before that can, redirect that? I mean, I don't know, because you even talk about, like if you think about, like, directors doing a great job on a scene, like, and then the crew morale being there, well, that could be day 2, 3, 4. And then on day 5, there's some scene that they're unprepared for. And now they've been exposed as not being able to do those kind of scenes, and you know what I mean? So it's kind of like, and that's more of like a skill thing versus like a temperament thing.
Absolutely. And actually that touches on one other thing that I think is very important as it relates to a direct answer. Confidence is very important. And by the way, confidence is a symptom of preparation, right? Like, when you're prepared, you're confident. And, like, I've had a couple experiences on this show where we have directors come in and they're just not, and it's like it's like that shit of they spend the first 2 days, like, moving chairs around in Video Village, where it's like, it's because they just don't know what the fuck they're doing, and that, once that happens, you've lost the ship. and everyone's just like, so it is, I do think that there's some fine tuning that the DGA has to do as it relates to the director relationship on set with the writer or showrunner or whatever.
What could be good is having, like, in the same way we have these orientations for first-time directors, which I didn't take. I mean, which I didn't have to take, but I took it, and I was very happy that I did. And then there's like producer director things. I took that session, when I did that job. Like having, I mean, maybe this already exists, but having more of, or introducing some kind of, union collaborative conversation about this, where those kind of anecdotes can be shared and best practices or whatever can be figured out.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, like when I had to do a DGA orientation, and it was taught by two directors. I don't remember their names, and it's not helpful to even share their names, but one of them at one point was like, he's like, okay, let's talk about writers. He's like, in my experience, writers are, essentially neurotic and precious and all this. And I was just like, I mean, look, I only know me and the people I write with in terms of how they function on set. But I was like, wow, dude. So in other words, like you don't even take us fucking seriously. Like, I mean, and that to me was really disturbing, and it has really stayed with me, by the way. Like, just the portrayal of writers is sort of like, just sort of like a hindrance, right? Mm-hmm. Something you have to navigate your way around, as opposed to your partner and and collaborator. Like, that's what it's supposed to be. And there has to be trust there, Right. And so I found that to be sort of disappointing in a way. And again, it was only these, I'm sure other directors feel differently. So I'm not, but that was the experience I had in this orientation. So,
well, on the flip side of this, I guess final question is like, have there been, or what are some instances where like you've seen, and maybe in this show in particular, where it's like, oh wow, like that scene was particularly elevated, by something that the director did.
It happens all the time.
Yeah.
Happens all the time. I mean, that happens way more than the other thing I described, frankly. A director will see something that I didn't even think of or see, and they'll add it. I'll give you an example of something Rob Hardy did in an episode that I thought, wow, that really, would not have occurred to me. And Rob, of course, I'm sure. Yeah. So I forget what the scene was, and I forget what the episode was. I think it was like the last episode of season 3. I don't know. Maybe it was 4. But anyway, Rock comes to the door. She answers the door, and she's got a gun in her hand. And then she lets whoever it is in, and then she walks back into the house. What Rob did is, when she was walking back in the house, he zeroed in on the gun in her hand. Which, by the way, didn't really have anything to do with anything. But what it did was it heightened the suspense and sense of danger in a way that was super, super helpful. And it's just not something that was scripted. It was not something I thought about, but it was something he did. And I was like, and that's just one small example. And I was like, wow, that's better than what I thought it was going to be. And like, that happens all the time. The best version of what we do is that the director takes what's on the page and elevates it. And that happens all the time, and that's when you're just like, and I'll be honest, like, that's why I don't know that I would ever be a great director. I mean, I directed one episode and I found it really tough. I'm not going to lie. And like, when I sit there with you on set and you're like, I got what I need. I got this. It's like, my brain doesn't work in the same way that yours does, right? Like, you really, you have this capacity to sort of like in your head do the edit, see it sort of visually. I don't have that. Now, is that something I could teach myself? Maybe, but I don't know that I even have the time or desire. But but it's like, it's one of those things where, and I really believe this, like, I could get good at it, but I could never get great at it like you. And like at this point in my life, if I can't get great at it, then there's really no point in doing it, you know? And you're great at it. And so like,
thank you, man.
Yeah. Like why would I put myself in that chair if it's only going to be good? I'd rather have someone in there who can do it great. Right. And that's what we do. We try to be great.
Well, yeah, man. Well, no, that's an interesting combo. And for folks listening, that's like some shit you should be feeling quite happy you heard, because you won't hear these conversations like in that level of detail about what it's really like to do the job. So I appreciate the question. I don't know if I gave any answer worth anything, but it's I'm on the same page with you with, it's like having rules and having framework, but also, being practical and finding a way to be able to make the show what it has to be. Because at the end of the day, in the same way that like sometimes like I need to get something from an actor where, they might feel like, oh, this is like, I don't, I've actually reused this quote I got from you, like believability at the expense of drama, is not a good thing. And, oftentimes like an actor might not want to give me something that I think serves the scene, serves the genre, you know what I mean? Like serves the moment. And it's like, you're going to look like you're in the wrong movie. Yeah. And trust me, that shit's not dope. Right. Yep. And on the same token, like, I don't want to look like I'm in the wrong TV show. You know what I mean? So like, it is collaborative, and you have to find, you have to be open to it on both sides.
And I think, as I said earlier, the best version of what we do is that we are working together to get to the same place, which is to get this thing to be the best version of what it can be. And in pursuit of that, at some point we got to put ego aside, we got to put whatever, and just like, let's make this fucking great, Right. And because sometimes we do this and it isn't great, to be honest, despite our best efforts, everything we've done, sometimes it isn't great, Right. That doesn't mean we don't keep aiming for that, but sometimes it's good. It's not great.
And the other little thing too, like, for those thinking about job security, it's like you force a scene style and texture onto, the people who hired you. They're going to remember they didn't get what they want. You know what I mean? Like that's going to be your swan song. So like, what's the point of like, like I could force filet mignon on you, but all you wanted was a fucking Big Mac. You're not gonna speak to the gourmet attributes of a Wagyu steak. Like you're not gonna be like, you fuck that guy. Free $100 steak. Like it. So you have to be considerate of also like, is there value in what you're trying to force into into the situation? Yeah, man. Look, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of production, the rap, man. And yeah, man, that's the word. I can't wait for when does season 4 drop?
As of right now, I'm not exactly sure, but sometime in this winter. So it'll be soon.
All right. Cool, man. Well, Sascha Penn, appreciate you, brother. Thank you for the time, man.
My pleasure.
What's up, people? This is Pete Chatmon. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter via @PeteChatmon. Follow the pod on IG via @Let'sShootWithPeteChatmon, and hit up our mailbag with questions, suggestions, or hey, donations if you're feeling like it via Let'sShootWithPeteChatmon@gmail.com. And just in case you need to know how to spell it, that's Pete with the last name Chatmon. Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon is produced and edited by the multi-talented cut creator Tristan Nash. Assistant produced by the young mogul Jada George, and features the wonderfully gifted Kelly McCreary as our announcer. It's written by yours truly, but I mostly come up with these questions on the fly, which you've probably noticed. Go ahead and get your podcast swag via PeteChatmon.com and leave a review on iTunes if so inclined. That shit matters. Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon is sponsored by Scriptation. Scriptation makes it easy to go paperless on set, increase your productivity, and save hours of time. Let's Shoot listeners get a special discount on Scriptation Industry Pro. Go to scriptation.com/Pete to learn more. Thanks for listening, y'all. Tune in next week for our interview with actor and director Rose McIver. She's the talented star of CBS's hit show Ghosts, recently renewed for 2 seasons. That's amazing. And she stepped into the director's chair this season with great vision and great success. She's a class act and a real talent. So stay tuned. And of course, in the meantime, stay safe, spread love, and keep creating.